So let's deal now with this claim from Lewis, this idea that, hey, listen, maybe he just should choose to self-quarantine himself. We're talking, of course, of Dr. Spencer, who came back from Guinea and upon exhibiting fever, went to Bellevue's isolation unit and has been diagnosed, has been confirmed that he has Ebola. This huge flare-up has started involving New York and New Jersey, including New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, about mandatory quarantine. Let's deal with mandatory quarantine. And I know that's not what Lewis was suggesting. We don't ask doctors who treat infectious diseases here in the U.S. to spend their lives in quarantine for no good reason. So we would not ask doctors who come back from Africa let me rephrase that. We would not demand that they be put into this government quarantine in spite of showing absolutely no symptoms if they are indeed following the regulations put out there by Doctors Without Borders. Remember, we've had one death, and the people who caught the disease caught it from an individual who had it, and they were treating him knowing that he had the disease. Let's be smart here. The quarantine, okay? We have now a backpedaling from New York State about mandatory quarantine. And there was this individual, Casey Hickox, who's a nurse, who was placed upon landing at Newark Airport under a mandatory quarantine. Huge controversy, questions about whether this is even legal, whether this is constitutional. And now, after tons of complaints and criticism of this policy enacted by New York and New Jersey, Casey Hickox has been allowed to go home and to kind of be in what Lewis is describing as a self-quarantine within your own home. Let's put aside the legality for a second here. There's no evidence at all that requiring doctors and nurses to quarantine for 3 weeks if they are non-symptomatic would do anything to stop the spread of the disease. We heard from Harvard University's Ajish Jha, who said, quote, "It's completely unnecessary. I'm a believer in an abundance of caution, but I'm not a believer in an abundance of idiocy." One reason that Doctors Without Borders have said they don't demand mandatory quarantine is that they would be quarantining a disease. These people would be incubating a disease that does not spread that easily. And Lewis, if we have ever had more proof that it does not spread that easily, it is what has been going on here in the U.S. with the few cases that we've had.
It seems to be perfectly under control. Yes, but I would ask doctors returning to just be as cautious as possible. I know this guy was taking all the proper precautions,
Right.
but there's nothing wrong with just spending a few weeks, spending the vast majority of your time at home.
I don't disagree that if you have the capability of doing that, that is not an unwise thing to do, again, in an abundance of caution. But I believe
I'm not saying that we should throw these people in a hospital quarantine ward by any means.
And it appears that it may not even be legal. Lawrence Gostin, who's a law professor at Georgetown, said that, who, by the way, has been in touch with Casey Hickox through her mandatory quarantine about her legal options, said this is an illegal quarantine order and it is unconstitutional. He said you can't catch Ebola from someone unless they're infected and showing symptoms, and that a court would be right to be incredibly suspicious of this, Lewis, because you're essentially denying a whole class of people their liberty. She's, quote, "she's being detained because she's a member of a large class of people who happen to have been in the region." So it's not clear that this is even a legal mandatory quarantine, which fortunately now has been backed off of by New York and New Jersey.
Yeah, it's the right move. It's a smart move. It's really not legal, but it's just part of the paranoia.